Rolling. Audrey Nolan, camera B, take one.
Hi.
Hi there.
Joe, this is recording already,
Time.
right?
Nope.
Well, what do I have to hit? Record?
Record button.
Awesome.
Is the time moving?
Yeah. Yep.
Good.
Awesome.
Hi, Tyler.
Would you tell us your name?
My name's Adela Rodriguez Nolan.
Heck yeah.
It's really Adela Audrey Rodriguez Nolan.
And how old are you?
I'm 102 and more than a half years old.
Yeah. What has it been like living in Luke? You've spent your
I loved it.
entire...
It was my life. I loved it. Although we went to many states before we came to Maryland.
Yeah.
My father went to Kansas when he came to this country,
Yeah.
to Kansas. And that was near Odessa, Kansas. And then 2 years later, my mother came from Spain,
Yeah.
and she brought her children with her. And I was one of them. I was born in Spain. And she brought me and my brother and my oldest sister, 3 of us. And they didn't speak a word of English, how they did it. She arrived in New York and then took the train and went to, she lost my sister, well, that was later in Chicago. My sister Bana went around, they were moving from Kansas at the time to Niagara Falls. So we lived in Niagara Falls for a while. And then every time there was a strike in the work my father was doing, he wouldn't wait for the strike to be over. He would move. They'd call friends, and friends would take friends in those days in their homes till they found a home to stay in. So they moved from Kansas to Alliance, Ohio. I think it was Alliance. And then later, they moved to Clarksburg, West Virginia. And then they moved to, well, let's see, they were in Niagara Falls and Ohio and Clarksburg, West Virginia. And but it was from Alliance, Ohio. They came, my father came here to work because the boss called him because the boss of the section of the paper mill had gone to Spain and had boarded in my father's father's home in Spain while he took a course in paper making.
Yeah.
And then he came back, the boss came back, Mr. Petter, and he started the bleach plant in the mill, in the paper mill. And they called my father and said, would he like to work in Luke? So he came from Alliance, Ohio, and he boarded with some people for about a year while he made enough and everything. Then he called my mother again, and she came, and they came to Luke. And that was in 1921, I think. And that was my mother with the 3 of us. And then we had a home up on Luke Hill, the highest home up on the top of the hill. It was a little home. And in those days, the paper mill was the one that said to people where they could live and how they could live and how much they made. And they were taken care of by the paper mill.
And when you, where were you born in Spain? Do you know what the town was
Oh,
called?
yeah. Peña del Rey
Yeah.
is where the family lived all the time. But I think I was born like they live in Cumberland or in, Las Parthenas. But I think that they have me titled that I was born in Peña del Rey. And baptized there in their church. And their churches was everything. They kept records of everything. And then during the war, the church was demolished, and all our records burnt.
Yeah.
We had nothing.
And how did you get from Spain to the U.S.?
Well, with my mother, she brought us in a board ship to New York, and then she took a train to Kansas City.
But do you remember a lot of the experience on the boat?
On the boat a little bit.
Yeah,
I remember my mother crying because her father was a mayor in his little town in Spain.
Yeah.
And her father said, "You can't go to that country by yourself with 3 children. I'm going to send my oldest boy with you."
Yeah.
So he sent his son with my mother. Well, when he arrived at the airport, at the
Shipyard or whatever?
in New York, at the place where she was,
Oh, yeah. Right.
she had come to,
Ellis Island?
Ellis Island.
Yeah.
And they said, "Now, you're all fine." My mother said, "Olive had diphtheria, my oldest daughter." And Mom kept her covered all up and down, not to show, because anyone had anything was put aside and made to wait. But my mother saved Olive, their oldest daughter, from coming, and they didn't check her, so they didn't know she had diphtheria. But then her brother came to be passed upon, and he said, they asked him how old he was. Well, I don't think he was quite 22. They said, "We want you to be at least 22 before you could pass out to the country." And the boy said, "I can't go. I mean, I'm not that old, but I'm going." My mother said, "Oh, yes. He came with me and he's going with me. He has to take me to Kansas." So they said, "You can't go. He has to go back." And my mother said, "He won't go back." So I remember as a child that she was very upset and that she would not leave the office. And they said, "It's closing time, lady, and we have to get you out." She said, "I will not leave the office, and I will not let him go back." And they waited and waited, and finally they got together and they said, the officials got together and said, "Let him go, but he'll have to come back in maybe a year or so." And they said, "This lady won't leave," and it was closed. I remember her crying and saying, "I will not leave." So there we were, it was closing time, and they let us go, and they let him go. But then he went back, and he stayed back later. But he went to live with her for a while.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very strong of her.
Absolutely.
How she did that, I don't know. She was wonderful.
And then when you moved to Luke, you said you lived on Luke Hill.
Yeah.
And was this your second home then?
Oh.
Or did you have a few homes in Luke? Did you bounce?
Oh, well, in Luke, yes, we were up on the Luke Hill. And then one day there was an empty house on Fairview Street in Luke.
Yeah.
And the boss came, as always, the boss came to my father and he said, "There's an empty house in Luke and it has more bedrooms. It has 2 bedrooms upstairs and they make one downstairs." He said, "Would you like to move to that house?" And they said, "Yes, we'll move down." So they moved from Luke Hill to the Fairview Street. Well, they were there a good while. And then this house was empty. This house was built for one of the bosses. In those days, the supervisors the town would build a home for them. Well, he was going away, and this was empty. And they said, "Would you like to have that house down there? Because you have 6 children, and I guess his boss had a lot of, what shall I say, strength or care or attention from the others, because he was the boss of the bleach room. So anyway, my father said, "I'd like to move," but my mother said, "No, the rent is too high. We can't make it." And they said, "How much will the rent be for that bigger house down there. They said, the rent will be $22 a month. And she said, oh, we can't make that. So she sent me to the main office and to see the man that took care of the homes. And I said, Mr. Failing, my mother can't, they can't move down there. They want to, but the rent will be too high.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Right, $22.
So she said, he said, well, we're going to put steam heat in and we'll put it in for you for nothing. We raise it $5 for every person for the steam heat. And yours would be $7 because of the bigger house. You need more. But he said, we won't charge you for the steam heat. Yeah. So we came down here at $22 a month. And before we came, though, they sent their maintenance people in, and they painted all these walls. This is the color it was. Yeah. I've never changed it. I just washed it off every. They plastered all the walls, and they arranged everything. And we came to move here, and we've been here ever since.
And once you got married, did you move out of this house then?
When I got married, my mother had died.
Oh, okay.
And my father was here by himself. So I stayed with him. And I kept him until he passed away. And then we bought the house. Oh, but we bought the house from him before he died, because we put it in all the children were, like what they were all supposed to get. So we put it in. We paid him, and he put it in the bank, and so we bought the house before he died, which I was glad.
How much was the house? Do you remember?
$6,000. They had paid $7,000 something, and we paid him $6,000 something. I don't know what, but anyway, our lawyer was lawyer Manges, I think, from Cumberland, and he said, Audrey, be sure you put in there that your father will live there for the rest of his life, because your husband one day might say, we want our own house, and want to put him out. And he said, nobody should put your father out. So he put in the will that he would be in this house until he died. Yeah. And he was cared for and taken care of. 23 years after my mother died, I took care of him all the time.
And
till he passed away.
Did any of your siblings or family live as long as you have?
My sister is 96 or 97 right now. She's in West Palm Beach, Florida. That's the only sister I have. Yeah. The others have passed away. She's, there's her picture. She's a colonel in the service. She was a nurse in the World War II, and she's a colonel now. Yeah. in the reserves. That's her, and that's her picture right there.
And that's Olive?
This is Bana.
Bana?
Bana. B-A-N-N-A. Olive is the oldest when she died.
Yeah. And since living in Luke, what kind of changes have you seen? What is something that I know it's changed a lot?
There's so many changes.
Do you remember at its peak how many people were living in Luke? Do you remember around or?
I think one day they told me that. Am I moving around too much?
You're good. Feel free. I just don't want you to trip over the cord.
Yep.
Or hit your head.
That's what I was looking for.
One day, let's see, they said 100 and. I hate to give a number because I'm not certain, but it was over 100. Now it's only like 70 people.
Right. Wasn't there at one point like a school here and everything? And
we have our that's where we had graduation in the 8th grade. We had it in the Devon Club, which was the Devon Club was the building that had everything. It had bowling downstairs, and it had a fountain upstairs, and we had ice cream and and then they had a library, a library, and then they had pool tables, and people spent that was the recreation section of the town. So we lived in that Devon Club. So when we graduated from the 8th grade at the school, we had it on the stage at the Devon Club here, and I was the valedictorian, the smallest one in the whole crowd.
Did you give a speech?
I had to, yeah, and I still remember a couple words I said. As you receive, so shall you receive. As you give, so shall you receive. And I remembered that one sentence. How I got it, I don't know. But anyway, we had graduation at the 8th grade. Then I got the medal, and I got all that stuff.
And how many kids were in your graduating class?
Well,
around
25 or so. Not very many.
Yeah. And you also worked at the paper mill too, right?
Yeah, I worked there 31 years.
Yeah.
I worked as secretary to the Bruce High School for 17 years. Yeah. And I loved that with children. Mm-hmm. And of all ages. They became, and I taught some classes when they had a study period that they'd have me go in there. So I taught the kids Spanish sentences. And to this day, these old women, the other day, one woman came over, she says, "Do you remember me, Audrey? I'm so-and-so from Garrett County." I said, "I don't remember everybody." She said, "I know the 2 sentences we learned. I could speak Spanish, and my daughter went to college, tried to learn it, and she couldn't. And I told her I knew these words. So I just taught them words like, "¿Cómo estás?" or "¿Por qué vienes?" or "¿Quieres dormir aquí?" No, ¿quieres dormir conmigo? Pero, "¿Quieres comer aquí?" or "¿Quieres pasar tiempo?" Just words that they might use when they'd want to. And they loved it. They said they remembered those because I took each one, 2 of them together at a time. And during a study period, you could do anything.
Right.
But I remember the principal coming over, Mr. Fisher. He said, "Audrey, I walked by that study period 2 or 3 times to the door. They're very quiet in there. What are you doing to keep them quiet?" I said, "I'm talking to them and teaching them something." He said, "Well, there's something because they don't keep quiet in study periods like." So I enjoyed the school very much, but I worked there 17 years. But then they paid better wages in the mill, so there was a office open to the superintendent of the pulp mill, and I applied on a Friday, and on Monday I was working. So I worked there for 31 years.
Any recommendations on how I can live to be as old as you are?
I don't know how to tell you to live longer, but I do believe that just working and enjoying life moderately, of everything moderately, that you will do better than those who go too far one way or the other. Yeah. That's my only feeling. I did everything, and I did it moderately. Everything was, and I lived at home. I had to help my parents a lot because of the language that they could not understand as well. Although they both became citizens of the United States and understood enough to answer questions and spoke. They spoke very, very well, I think, for being at home all the time. And they did well.
Audrey, we're going to stop. This was awesome. Exactly what we wanted.
I'm glad you got something.